been working in the space of AI since the mid-90s when I did my studies in MIT. At INSEAD, I've been, myself and my colleagues have been doing executive training on AI for the past 7, 8 years. There is huge need for executive training. We have more than a couple of thousand executives that come through our executive programs on AI. All I can say is that different parts of the world are in different speeds. So clearly, some parts of the world are way ahead and way more aware of what AI means for their economy and their business. Others are less so. And I think it's important to note this because in many ways, depending on how advanced a country or a company is on their leverage of new technologies, especially for powerful technologies like this, the bigger the inequality in the near future. So it's a race. It's a lot of value to be created. Even though nowadays, I'm sure you're hearing about an AI bubble. And, there is some up and down, some volatility in the market. But I'd like to make sure everybody understands that whether there's a bubble or not has to do with the market pricing today. It does not have to do necessarily with the underlying value. The underlying value can be there. The question is, how is the market pricing it now? And as we always know, for every innovation, especially when there is big innovations, like in this case AI, the market in the short term, maybe a year or two or whatever it is, usually overestimates and goes fast. But then in the midterm, 5, 10, 20 years, and long term, of course, it massively underestimates the value of this technology. You see here under the Financial Times news screen, the stock price of Amazon. Amazon started when it went public in 1997 at 0.9 cents, which is like, now it's like more than $200. And you can kind of barely see the dot-com bubble burst in 2000. So sure, in the short term, there was some burst of the bubble, which, a few years later, you can barely see it. So be very careful with the bubble discussion. And also remember that bubbles bursting is a great thing because then what this means is that there is a flight to quality. So you have to focus on quality and you have to remember that the value from these technologies is enormous. It may be mispriced in the short term, but that's not relevant for you. You still have to create value. And that is enormous in the midterm and long term. How big is it? Well, it depends on whom you ask, but everybody agrees that it's in the range of tens of trillions of dollars per year. So, for example, Goldman Sachs says only from Gen AI, not the non-Gen AI, only from, Gemini, ChatGPT, Llama, you name it, DeepSeek, it's about 7 trillion a year. If you add the rest, which is a little bit the blue line of McKinsey here, the blue part of the graph. If you add the rest of AI, the so-called predictive AI, that the more pre-ChatGPT AI, then it goes up to about 20 trillion a year. 20 trillion a year of value creation. A lot of it comes from cost savings because of productivity improvement and because of automation of tasks, which of course doesn't mean that people will lose their job. All it means that those people can be allocated, if managed properly, to create new value and expand the market. I mean, we all know very well that out of the, let's say 8 billion who live in the world, only about 2.5 billion live the lives that everybody in the room lives. So there is another, almost 6 billion people that can be, potentially lifted off, let's say, some of them from poverty. I mean, we saw all how China lifted 800 million people out of poverty in like just 20 years or so. So then the opportunity is enormous. The need for growth is enormous. And we are just at the beginning of making, all 8 billion potentially of people on the planet, or whatever the number will be 20 years from now, be very healthy and well off. And everybody else, of course, even more so. One of the big themes coming up, so far we've seen AI mostly on the internet as a chatbot, for example, or also on companies as a chatbot. That's only the beginning. In fact, it's almost nothing. The big thing coming up is when AI comes to the physical world, and also, most important, when AI impacts scientific discovery. We already have some science like this. You see here already a year ago almost, DeepMind from Demis Hassabis, who got the Nobel Prize. Demis Hassabis, the founder of DeepMind, who got the Nobel Prize in chemistry last year, has been developing so-called AI co-scientists or even AI scientists. This is the big thing coming. This can be orders of magnitude more impactful than the chatbots we only have today. And of course, this has created also other implications for companies and for society. So this is just an example where we have organizations coming up that will be, let's say 1,000 humans or whatever number is, and a few tens of thousands of AI co-workers. And the big question is, how does one leverage those AI co-workers? How does one manage an organization that has 10 times more AI co-workers than humans? And how much value one creates, and also how much complexity one adds and has to manage. So we already see signs of companies which are like, just a handful of people, and they generate, millions of dollars profit per employee. This is like the ratio of profits per employee is a key ratio that, because of the use of AI, will massively increase. So already we have revenues per employee which are completely mind-blowing, and one could never imagine even a few years ago. So this is the rise of hybrid organizations coming up soon. Of course, there are also many, many risks. This is just some risks from the National Security Commission on AI of the US. Things around data poisoning, new cybersecurity attacks, disinformation, social media propaganda, impact on elections, AI engineered pathogens, a lot of risks. And therefore, one has to be very careful and very vigilant, both to create value, but to also manage the downside. Now, at the same time, in the big picture, because of the potential value, but also the potential destruction, of course, there is what one calls AI race. I'm not sure it's a good word. The Americans like to call it race, not necessarily the rest of the world. China, for example, uses less this word and focuses more on the actual value creation in healthcare, in transportation, in education, in energy, you name it. But the point is that there is enormous, not only competition between companies, but also competition between nations and regions, which gives an extra boost on the investments. We see trillions of dollars being invested on AI, and an extra boost on the competition of companies, because AI is about whoever wins kind of these AI competitions wins the market and wins also the world in some sense. You see down there a podcast that I'm doing. I'll come back to this later, which is a lot about how AI potentially rebalances the world. It has to do with rebalancing of, the economic power, military and defense power, culture, and you name it. And a lot of it is driven by talent, of course. And there is a talent war at the same time. So you have to develop your talent, of course, because talent is what makes things happen. The big picture also is that AI is not just technology, digital technology, it's also other technology. We see already discussions about rare earth. You see discussions here is President Trump in Davos last year talking about energy, the need of energy for fueling the big data centers. The US has already been making investments in the order of 50 gigawatts for data centers, 50, while China has 30, Europe has about 12. So energy, rare earth material are very central in the AI revolution, and they are also big part of the trade wars, if you wish, and of the geopolitical negotiations going on, as you know very well. This is all driven by AI, because these are inputs to the AI revolution. Now, let me now go to what it means for business. This is a very basic, simple, Mickey Mouse, let's say, version of how one can go around developing an AI strategy in your business. And this is something we're using ourselves very often in our practices. So, for example, you have to spend some time on upskilling and training people. This is critical. There is a lot of misunderstanding out there. There's a lot of hype. There's lack of knowledge. And unless people understand the basics, they will not be able to talk about it. They will not be able to think about it. And people have to be from the CEO to the C-suite executives, the senior executives, management, and everybody else. So it's very important to upskill the organizations as quickly as possible so that people can have a good understanding of what's possible. Then after that, or in parallel, of course, you start developing the AI strategy. You start identifying what is your AI ambition? How far can you push it? How far do you want to push it? how far does the competition push it, both internally in your market and potentially outside, because your market, how much your market share also is not the only thing that matters. The thing that also matters is how big is the market you address. And if the market you address is taken by new players coming from outside, you may have a big market share, but you may have a smaller market because it's taken by people from outside. So you have to understand how is your ambition relative to your current competition and your future competition. And how do you prioritize where you invest? What are your capabilities for AI, data, talent, compute, understanding? What are the gaps and how do you close those gaps? What kind of risks you may have, but also what's the operational plan? And that's what one can call the overall AI strategy of your company. Of course, then after that, which may take a couple of months, you have to execute. You have to deliver the use cases. You have to improve your data foundations. You have to keep developing and refining your operating model. And of course, a lot of it is about change management. Every organization needs to go through a change management experience, if you like, every time there is an adoption of new technology. So these are kind of some of the elements you all have to consider. Of course, much harder to do than to say. These things can take, months and eventually, of course, a continuous journey. Everybody has to play a role on this, from the CXOs to, of course, the senior management team. For example, the CEO. What's the role of the CEO? Well, of course, everything starts from the leadership. So the CEO has to have the right mindset, the right understanding, the right ambition, and set that ambition for the whole organization, right? You have to make sure that data is really first-class citizen, because it's everything about data. The quality, the availability, the richness. Make sure that you go fast enough. Speed is important, but of course, at the same time, with prudence, right? Not break things, not break the organization, not break, the systems, not break the customers' trust, and all those things. And of course, make sure that AI is everywhere in the organization because it can impact every single thing you are doing in the organization. Every single job, every single task, every single process can be impacted by AI. The chief information officer, what is their role? They have to make sure that they support the transformation and they make sure that there is enough standardization and strong infrastructure to support the transformation, right? They have to make sure that they have some kind of governance in place. So that there is not just scattered technological projects here and there, but there is some governance and some rationalization of the infrastructure investments, and make sure, of course, that they deliver on the SLAs to their internal and external customers. HR has a role, the chief HR officer. They have to make sure that they keep the company upskilled, back to what we said before. They have to make sure that they identify gaps relative to competition, relative to other markets, and fill those gaps, right? Manage the career paths of people that may be impacted with the AI revolution. And of course, it's a lot about culture and adoption and change management, and that has to be also led and supported and led to some extent by HR. So a lot of work for everybody, and of course these are just some examples, but everybody has to be very, very busy and committed in their own contribution. There are lots of trade-offs. So for example, there are trade-offs about how fast you go, what kind of AI should you use, experimentation versus immediate return on investment. How much you invest on use cases that create value versus how much you invest on capabilities that don't create immediate value but enable future value, etc., etc. Lots of questions here. Just the toolkit I worked on with the World Economic Forum a couple of years ago, as you see, which is before the Gen AI revolution, but still relevant for the non-Gen AI revolution, but also Gen AI. Lots of questions there. You can access this tool online, the World Economic Forum C-Suite Toolkit, and has a lot of questions for you. Like, what are the responsibilities of the executive? What are the most important skills to hire? What do you need to succeed in AI initiatives and many others? This is just one pointer. Lots of the business questions, which will always hold, but they are very AI specific. Lastly, as I said, we are doing a lot of executive training at INSEAD. These are some programs that I'm directing myself for the past 7 years or so. Many of them are open enrollment, so have participants from all around the world from different companies, and others are company specific. So you have like the C-suite or the top executives from one company being in the program. And there is huge demand simply because everybody understands the potential of this technology for competitiveness and for value creation, of course. I'll skip this one. It's an example of the program. This is the podcast I mentioned. For those of you interested, this again, the QR code will take you to a LinkedIn post where I have the links to the podcast, where we discussed with some amazing leaders, I must say. The guests are pretty impressive about all sorts of different aspects of AI for business, society, geopolitics, technology, innovation, science, and the likes. I'll pause here